On the line, we are actually joined by Nick Arlett, the Action Against ULEZ campaigner. Nick, can you hear us all okay?
I can hear you, thank you.
We've got a bit of a...
We should be okay now.
I loved him in ZZ Top.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Nick, thank you for joining us. Obviously, free speech is the topic of the programme this evening, but talk to us through what happened with you at a protest.
Okay, we went to Tooting. This was a normal thing for me. I'd done about 60 or 70 in the previous 18 months. We went to Tooting, we set up, we arrived there before 12 o'clock. It was due to start at 12 o'clock. Actually, the local police actually assisted us in setting up, and we'd been there for maybe half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and we'd get people arriving telling us that they'd seen a lot of police in local streets, you know, a lot of cars, vans and that sitting around. And then all of a sudden, loads and loads of police turned up, told us we had to go, we had to leave. Well, we wasn't exactly impressed by it, obviously, you know, there was a few arguments, there was nothing violent or anything like that, there were just a few sort of normal bits of demonstration over it. And eventually we started clearing up. And I was wandering around, they'd formed a line across Thrall Road, and I was sort of close to the line, never went actually near the line, but I was sort of, but my car was parked down there because I carry a lot of the stuff with me, and people were going to bring it back to my car. So I'm wandering about the pavement, and all of a sudden a police officer comes to me, I'm on the pavement, asked me to escort him to talk to an officer. So he escorts me into the road, and this WPC, or policewoman, apparently we can't say WPC anymore, but a female police officer, then tells me that I'm under arrest under section 42A. And pardon, what? I was dumbfounded.
Yeah.
At that instant, she grabbed from my phone, it was in my hand. Not a word said, just grabbed at my phone. So I pulled it up and I actually put my arm above my head and shouted out, can someone take my phone? Because I didn't want them taking my phone. At that point, I don't know how many there was that jumped on me. 5, 6 coppers, bent my arms back, you know, behind me, handcuffed me very high behind my back, very painfully. And then bundled me into a police van, took me down a side road, put me in a police van. They sucked me there for, I don't know, at least half an hour, and eventually, it's quite a warm day, in a little plastic box inside this thing. Then they decided they were going to take us to Charing Cross, which I found a little bit odd, because we, you know, there's local nicks there, but they decided to take us to Charing Cross. So we had an extremely painful and uncomfortable drive there. Because while I was in the van, 4 others had been arrested, all violently. No, I beg your pardon. Lloyd Dunsford, they escorted him across the road and they arrested him. The other 3 were violently arrested. One was actually the only female involved. She'd been dressed as, they're very light-hearted, these things, they're very light-hearted. And she'd been dressed as a dinosaur. She was actually sitting on the floor, getting out of her dinosaur outfit, when they, arms up her back, actually pulled her hair. She's screaming in pain because her arm was already in a brace anyway. So she's, you know, we're not young people, right? Martin Whitehead, he was grabbed, dragged across the road, thrown up against the wall with his arm up his back. He's screaming in pain, when in fact he's crying because he was in so much pain, poor sod. And then, but for me, the worst one was actually Kevin. Now, Kevin is the one that wasn't charged the same as us. He was charged with obstructing a police officer. Now, if you saw Kevin, you'll know he's a very slight old man. He's extremely unhealthy, extremely unhealthy. The officer that arrested him bent his hand back, stuck his nails in his hand, blood pouring everywhere, because one of these things is on his blood thinners, so there's blood everywhere. Anyway, we end up in court. I mean, I don't know how brief you want this to be.
Nick, just to cut in there, why did they do that? If you were all kind of agreeing and you were kind of, as you say, kind of packing or agreeing to go, why did they suddenly get physical with you?
I honestly think that they wanted to make examples of us. They wanted to arrest people that day. Right. We, as I say, I've done 60 or 70 of these across London in the previous 18 months. Never a problem, but I do have a certain association with calm.
One would assume it's because Sadiq Khan doesn't want protests against Sadiq Khan in his hometown.
Yeah.
That is the reason.
Can I add something? We weren't just protesting against ULEZ at that time. We were actually campaigning for Susan Hall, who was the mayoral candidate opposing Sadiq Khan at the end of his road. So I think.
But hang on a second, Nick. Let me just shock Nick with something which perhaps he didn't know. Look, when the Ahmadiyyan Muslims campaigned for the Conservatives in Tooting, Sadiq Khan insisted they all be sacked from their jobs, and they were hugely racially discriminated against. Let me tell you something. Sadiq Khan is a personally nasty piece of work, but he has no problem. I'm not saying break the rules, but insisting on crackdowns, demanding police action, galvanising people, and when it came to the bullying of the Ahmadiyyan Muslims, bullying people into what was not a genocide. That would be unfair, because genocide is an ethnic cleansing that is violent and is murderous. But he certainly did at least countenance people being thrown out of their jobs, thrown out of their homes, thrown out of their community because they politically disagreed with him.
Nick, I've got 60 seconds. Finish the story for me. So what happened then after when it went to court? You're sitting here today and it doesn't look like you're in a prison cell.
Okay. So eventually we get to court. We go to court, we plead not guilty, we get a hearing date. There's a lot of weird things that went on in the meantime. That when I first went into the custody suite at Charing Cross, obviously the custody officer asked the arresting officer why I'm there. This female then said that me, amongst others, were blocking the roads and we stopped access to an emergency vehicle, a fire engine. So I went, whoa, wait a minute. This is being recorded, isn't it? Because this is a total and utter lie.
Yeah.
We've never blocked roads, and there certainly wasn't a fire engine. Since then, I've done a Freedom of Information request, and I have a confirmation from the fire brigade that there was no emergency vehicle. So that was one lie that they told, which they repeated in court. Also, the blocking of the roads.
You're convicted at the magistrates' court. You've appealed it. I believe you've appealed it to Crown Court. The CPS have dropped the case immediately. Is that correct?
I hear that.
Sorry. You were convicted in the magistrates' court, but you appealed it to the Crown Court.
It ended up at the Crown Court. Yes, it ended up at the Crown Court. Yeah.
It's incredibly troubling. But one question I'd love to ask Nick, and look, obviously Nick's a campaigner rather than a lawyer, but why are we not pursuing a private prosecution for perjury against the police officer who gave evidence saying that there was an emergency service vehicle that was being impeded when he willfully lied about that?
Nick, we'll let you come back on that.
Okay. 7 police officers that day perjured themselves in court. Right. Absolutely. They provided their own video evidence of what happened that day. We weren't allowed to provide any, even though we had obviously hours of it. Yeah. So they provided their own evidence, which you would think would be the most damning and would make their case for them. Not one single bit of evidence, not one shows us in the roads. So the judge sat and watched them completely contradict every single thing that they showed on a video. And then he found us guilty, right? But we also found that the judge had a previous association with Khan. And there seems to be, I know it sounds a little bit murky, but it does make a lot of sense, right? Khan had been to a charity do, and the judge was asked about this, and he couldn't remember whether he'd made a donation or anything. That was very convenient, right? But it turned out that this particular judge and the police officer, the main police officer involved, the bronze commander that day, had also been involved in a case with Tommy Robinson, right? And they had to throw it out because there'd been procedural errors by the police officer involved. Strangely enough, this is now the reason, according to the CPS, is why they've dropped the case, because there were procedural errors.
There is something that many viewers will not be aware of, that the magistrates within the magistrates court will often pick the cases they want in order to stick the boot in people they politically disagree with. It is a shameful element of the system, but we see it time and time again.
The whole legal system has now become politicised.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Nick, that
But
is
to
all
come
we do
back to
have
you,
time
Andre.
for. Sorry to cut you off there. That is all we do have time for. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate that. Thank you.